I have started recording. Welcome to today's webinar on Implementation Critical Success Factors. I'm Dave Vance, Executive Director of the Center for Talent Reporting, joined by Andy Vance, our Operations Director today.
Hello, everyone.
Logistics for today's webinar. The PowerPoint will be sent to you afterwards along with a recording. We are recording today's session. They will also be available at the end of the week on our website in the right-hand margin of the home page, but we will send these out to you after the webinar today. Just a note, if you're calling from a phone, we will have time for questions at the end of the webinar, and I'd be happy to unmute you so that you can ask the question, but to do that, you'll need to have entered your audio PIN if you're calling from a phone. Also, if you have the computer in front of you, you should have selected the telephone option instead of mic and speakers on the GoToWebinar control panel. So we will look to take questions at the end of the webinar, and I will look to unmute you as you raise your hand at the end of the webinar. You can also type a question in, and we can try to see it there as well. We like to thank our sponsors at the beginning of all of our webinars because they play such a critical role in our being able to lead this initiative. Special thanks to Knowledge Advisors, our founding organization, and Oracle, our gold sponsor. We have 3 silver sponsors who you see there, as well as a number of founding bronze sponsors. So without their help, we could not do what we do. We are funded by sponsorships and by memberships. Today's discussion will focus on 3 critical success factors in implementing TDRp. And one is engaging the sponsors and stakeholders and forecasting the expected impact on organizational goals. So we're going to start today's focus with the sponsor on their engagement and the sometimes challenging effort to get their agreement on upfront expected impact. And we'll finish by talking about communicating results throughout the year and where the year-to-date and forecast numbers come from. And then we should have time for some questions and answers at the end. So today's webinar really focusing on sponsors, getting agreement on that, and then getting results throughout the year. So let's start with sponsor and stakeholder engagement. And let's start by defining sponsors and stakeholders so we're all clear on what they mean. Some people use these terms interchangeably. We are not. We are going to define sponsors as those organization or corporate officers directly accountable for achieving the business goal. They usually report directly to the CEO or at most one level down. Example would be an SVP of sales or a president of manufacturing. Contrast that with stakeholders, whom we defined as all those with a direct interest in the outcome, and that's a much larger group. So we have one sponsor per goal, but many stakeholders. You can imagine that many people in HR who are working with a sponsor are interested in the outcome. People in the sponsor's organization, like marketing staff, are interested in programs to help them. So many, many stakeholders, one sponsor is how we'll define our terms. Key is to engage both sponsors and stakeholders early and often, but especially the sponsor. We do need to get them involved early. It is their goal that we are trying to help them achieve, and we want their upfront agreement on the role HR can play. And if we both agree HR can play a role, then agree with them on the broad outline of the initiative, the cost, and very importantly, the expected impact of the HR initiative on their goal. Now, there are stakeholders in the sponsor's organization who will be a part of this, no doubt. We also want to agree on roles and responsibilities with the sponsor and the stakeholders in the sponsor's organization. And we'll need to update them regularly, especially for initiatives that run over a period of many months or throughout the entire year. Stakeholders, again, up front to discuss the role of the HR initiative so everyone's on board with it. And like the sponsor, working with other stakeholders, we all need to agree on what it's going to be, what the impact is going to be, and what the roles and responsibilities are. Agree on deadlines, especially if you're working with staff of the sponsor's organization. So, some upfront work and then work throughout the year to engage them and keep them informed. So more work perhaps than some have put in, but I think a lot do a good job at this already in terms of working carefully. A good practice is to document these agreements and share it. In fact, at Caterpillar, we found it was very helpful to come up with a one-page roles and responsibilities document. The top half of that page would have what we would do in Caterpillar University to help them achieve their goal. The bottom half would be what they have to do. After all, we're working with their employees. We cannot force their employees to do anything like apply learning. Only they can do that. So they have a very large role to play. Sometimes they don't appreciate how important their own role is. And so we found it very helpful to have that one-page document and get their agreement on that. So we each knew what we were going to have to do. Now, with that said, let's move on to one of the most important elements in the TDRp approach, and that is getting the upfront agreement with the sponsor on the expected impact. Probably one of the most difficult aspects of TDRp, but also one of the most important, especially if we are going to be a true business partner, delivering bottom line value to the organization, helping that sponsor to accomplish their goal. And if you don't set a measurable plan at the beginning for what you expect to accomplish, how would anyone know if the initiative is going to be worth doing? How would you put together a business case to compare cost to expected impact if there is no agreement on what the expected impact is? How can you execute throughout the year towards a goal if there is no goal? How would you judge at the end whether it was successful if you'd not agreed up front on what the measures of success were going to be? So ideally, the impact we're talking about is the expected or forecasted isolated impact of the HR initiative on the company goal. Generally, there are many factors that will be responsible for achieving a company goal. Certainly, if it's something like a sales goal, the economy, the competitors' actions will have effect on that goal. And some are beyond your control. What we're after here is the isolated impact of your initiative, isolating the impact of your initiative from the impact of all the other factors. So realizing there are other factors involved in achieving goals, we want to focus just on the impact of the HR initiative, separate it out from all of the others. We can do that quantitatively, meaning it'll be with numbers, or qualitatively, meaning we'll use adjectives, or sometimes, if we can't do that, we may need to look at a proxy measure for success, a stand-in for isolated expected impact. So, just so we all know what we're talking about here, this is an outcome statement. You've seen this before. As the priorities on the left, the business goals that come from the CEO here on the left-hand side. Over here we have the plan, in this case to increase sales by 20%. And we've got agreement here with the sponsor that this initiative should lead to a 25% contribution to the goal, or in other words, 25% times 20% is 5% increase in sales due just to the training initiative. That's an example of a quantitative isolated expected impact. There's a number there. Here's an example in support of Goal 3 to increase employee engagement scores, where the L&D initiative is expected to have an impact, but probably a low impact. So it will have an impact if we give all employees some training, but it won't be the major driver in increasing employee engagement. So we say low. That's an example of a qualitative. So you've got qualitative, quantitative, and we could also imagine the use of some proxies. So in this webinar, we're going to focus on where this high or low or 25% contribution to goal would come from. So first we need to plan the meeting with the sponsor, because the answer is it needs to come from an agreement with the sponsor, so we need to set up the meeting. The sponsor is the only one with the authority to make this forecast, to make this agreement on expected impact. You might start working with some people in the sponsor's organization, that would be stakeholders, and you might work up a suggested impact with them, but it needs to be approved by the sponsor. So either this discussion starts at the sponsor level, or it starts maybe with some people in the sponsor's organization, but cannot end until you have approval by the sponsor. The sponsor cannot be allowed to delegate this lower in the organization. The sponsor is the only one with the authority to make this agreement. And we would suggest you start with the friendlies. You know who they are, people whom you work well with, who get it, who appreciate the impact of HR already. So start with the friendlies who are supportive and most likely to get it. You're going to need to set up an appointment. We are not waiting to be asked. You are being proactive, setting up an appointment. You might have the department head set up the appointment. You might go with your department head then to the meeting. So you might have the department head set up the meeting with the sponsor, set up a meeting for 30 to 60 minutes. Each side can bring staff, but do not let the sponsor delegate the meeting. How might you open this discussion? It might be something like this. Thank you for your time today. We wanted to take a few minutes to discuss this important initiative we are planning to help you achieve your goal of 10% higher sales. We want to ensure we meet your expectations. We also want to ensure we make the best possible use of company resources. Let's talk about the impact we can reasonably expect from this initiative and see if we can agree on some measures of success that we can hold ourselves accountable to. The plan is to provide training to fill in the blank, to be completed by some date, with the expectation that after the training your people will be able to do whatever. Now, how much impact do you think this will have on the goal to increase sales by 10%? That's the question on the table, and we can take you through how we would do that. So I hope that seems very reasonable to people. It's hard to imagine any sponsor refusing to talk about this, refusing to want to be sure their expectations are met, that you use company resources well. So we have a couple different methods to assign the impact. For isolated impact, as I mentioned, it comes in two varieties, a quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative would mean we have the numerical impact of the HR program or initiative on the business goal. And it would set very specific, measurable expectations of our contribution. It's what we would like to have as often as we can. But when you start this, it is more typical that people are comfortable with a qualitative approach rather than a quantitative approach because it is so new to people. A qualitative approach would just be using a non-numeric approach, using an adjective to qualify the impact, like high, medium, low, or essential, rather than putting a number to it. And most everyone is comfortable with this approach. And if we cannot get agreement on isolated expected impact using either of those two methods, then Plan C is to use proxy measures. And a proxy is nothing but a substitute measure for impact. It would be nice if it were a leading indicator, and it should be highly correlated to the impact. So we'd prefer to have a measure of isolated impact. But if we can't get that, we can always agree on some proxy measure. So that's the fallback plan, is to use a proxy measure. A note on stating the goal to make our job easier and to make this discussion productive. We need the company goals not only to be SMART goals, specific and measurable, but we need them to be in delta terms, the change from last year. So if the goal for this year in your organization was to have sales of $55 million, that would be a SMART goal, but let's put it in delta terms. If sales the past year were 50 million and sales for next year, the goal is 55 million, the delta is the difference, or 5 million, or 10%. So we would state the goal as a 10% increase in sales. Likewise, if the goal already comes in percentage terms, often engagement scores, net promoter scores, satisfaction scores, come already in terms of points or percentages. And if a company wants to increase their employee engagement score from 71 to 75 points, the delta is 4 points. When it comes in points already, it's better to talk about the delta in terms of points and not just percentages, because that could be confusing. So we'd state this as a 4-point increase in engagement, not a 4% increase engagement. Someone could assume that by a 4% increase engagement, we mean 4% times 71 would be 2.8% increase. But no, we mean a 4-point increase, not a 2.8% increase. So to avoid potential confusion here, it's better to say a 4-point or 4 percentage point increase rather than just a 4% increase. So we want the goal to be in delta terms. Let's start with the quantitative. It is the harder one, and then you'll see from this methodology where we could easily fall back to the qualitative. The quantitative, there are 2 methods to accomplish this, the direct method and the percentage contribution method. Sometimes a SMART goal is not available from the organization. Actually, we've encountered a surprising number of companies that do not have SMART goals. They would say they want to increase sales, but they've never set a target or goal for it. That makes it harder to use the percentage contribution method, but there's always the direct method. And as the name implies, it's just a direct forecast or estimate of the impact of your HR initiative without regard to the company's goal. So if the company doesn't have a goal except higher sales, then you would simply, if you had a sales initiative, talk with the salespeople, talk among yourselves, look at what you've done historically, and come up with a reasonable expectation for the increase in sales that might come about due to your training. So you might just decide that it would be reasonable to assume a 2% increase in sales due to the training that you're contemplating, and then run that number by the salespeople, other senior leaders, being very humble and transparent, and asking them for guidance. And if they think it sounds like it's too much or too high, then you'll be happy to take a second look at it, perhaps revise it down based on their input. We did this at Caterpillar. We had some goals where we had multiple sponsors who could not agree among themselves on some things. So we used the direct approach occasionally. It was never questioned, as long as you approach this humbly, with transparency. Ask a lot of people for their input, ask them to review it, be open to change. They want to be sure you've talked to the right people, that you don't have any hidden agenda. And when you and the sponsor and others can all agree on something, that will satisfy others as well. So that's always an option, just the direct method. And by the way, if you're saying to yourself at this point, this all sounds a bit subjective, welcome to the world of business plans. For any of you who have not been involved in business planning, this is exactly what a business plan is. A business plan is your best guess about next year. And organizations put together a business plan every year, and it's nothing more than a set of best guesses of forecasts for next year. There is no guarantee to any of these. No one can prove any of these. Next year hasn't even started yet. It is your best guess for planning purposes for next year of what you can make happen given an uncertain world. But that's the world we live in. And all of your colleagues and other aspects of your company have been doing this for years. HR has not. They've gotten an exception for some reason, and it's not been good for our profession. It has diminished our credibility and our professionalism in the eyes of our colleagues. We need to step up and just be held accountable to the same standards and expectations as the rest of our colleagues. So they are all doing exercises like this, and we need to do it as well. Most often, however, you could use a percentage contribution method where we reach agreement with the sponsor on that percentage contribution, and then we would simply multiply the goal by the percentage contribution and get the agreed upon isolated impact. For instance, suppose we could agree with the sponsor the training could contribute 20% towards the achievement of their goal. And if their goal is a 10% increase in sales, and we can help get them 20% of the way there, then the isolated impact of training is just the 20% times the 10% equals a 2% increase in sales due to training. So 20% times 2% is a 2% increase. The 20% is the percentage contribution. The 2% is the expected increase in sales due just to the training. Again, the business goal, 10% increase in sales. We and the sponsor agree training could help achieve the 10% increase. We've talked about specific programs, target audiences, learning objectives, completion dates. It's going to be completed early in the year. It's going to have all the reinforcement and sponsorship of the sponsor, and we agree, given all of that, that we might have about a 20% impact. That 20% is just meant to be roughly right. It is a forecast, a plan for this next year that needs to be reasonable, but at the end of the year it'll probably turn out it wasn't exactly 20%. That's fine. Reality seldom conforms exactly to business plan. That's understood. So again, if we can get that 20%, we can multiply the 20% by the 10% and get the 2% increase in sales. That's what we're after here. So how do we do that? It won't work simply to ask the sponsor what that percentage contribution is. They won't have any idea what you're asking. They won't know how to answer it. The discussion will end right there. So you need to be a facilitator, and as a business partner, a bit of a performance consultant here as well. So start by asking the sponsor to list all the factors contributing to achieving the goal. And then ask the sponsor to prioritize the factors. Again, you're talking about something now which is dear to the sponsor's heart. They'll have an idea of what the factors are going to be because they've been thinking about what it's going to take for them to achieve their goal. So you ask them to prioritize the factors. Then we'd ask them to list the expected contribution of each one and work the percentages up until they add to 100%. The percentage next to the HR initiative in question is what we're looking for. This is that percentage contribution. And note, as a result of this process, that comes from the sponsor, not from you. It's not a burden on your shoulders. You facilitated the process. You asked questions, and you and the sponsor arrived at a percentage contribution. Let's see how that would work. And as I say, if this sounds difficult, we can always stop after we've got them prioritized here and just go with the qualitative approach. But we want to show you the quantitative approach first so you understand aspirationally what we would like to achieve, even if in practice we have to back down from plan A and go to plan B or plan C. You understand where we would like to go when we can. So let's say we're helping the sponsor to increase sales by 10%. And we've asked the sponsor, just top of mind, list the factors that are going to help achieve that 10% increase in sales. And they say things like, well, we're hiring 5 new salespeople. And of course the economy is growing, and that's going to help us, and we're going to open a new sales office. And oh, by the way, your colleagues over in Total Rewards have helped us design a new incentive system, which is going to give a big boost to salespeople. And we've been talking to folks in advertising, and they've got some great ideas for us. And oh, we're bringing out some new products thanks to research and development, and that's going to help us. And we've got a failing competitor. We're looking forward to picking up some customers from that failing competitor. We've got a new sales tracking system, and of course the reason we're talking today is that we're looking forward to your help with consultative sales and product features training. So you're just taking notes. You're just listening and learning. These are very interesting discussions, and they are sharing their knowledge. They didn't get to this position by mistake. So trust your senior leaders. They're in these positions for a reason. They have a lot of knowledge, a lot of wisdom about their area. They've been thinking about how they're going to accomplish their goal for next year, and they come up with a list. Sometimes the list may be this long, sometimes it may be shorter, but we'll take a longer list just to show you how it would work. It may only be 3 or 4 items instead of 7, 8, or 9, but that's okay. Next, we're going to ask that sponsor then to prioritize those drivers, those factors. So put them in priority order because they're not all equally important. So what single item out of that whole list was most important? Well, probably growth in the economy. And what might be second most important? Well, let's say it turns out to be our training in this case, but it wouldn't always be. And then maybe in the sponsor's mind, this new incentive system is going to play a big role, and they put it in third place. We just want to get the order approximately right, like in everything we do. Perfection is our enemy. We are not worried about perfection. We are not worried about absolute certainty. Those don't actually exist in the real world. We're trying to get close enough to make the right decisions. You can have ties. So we're just trying to get this in roughly the right order here, with the most important factors at the top and the least important factors at the bottom. And if they're not willing to do an ordinal ranking like 1 through 9, then high, medium, and low buckets, if you will. But at least put them into the 3 buckets of high, medium, and low. Now, if we're going down the quantitative approach, then maybe you don't do this the first year. Maybe this is something you say for the second year. But if we wanted to do this, we would then ask the sponsor next to assign a percentage contribution to each one, with the provision they have to add up to 100% at the bottom. And usually they would start out by attributing percentages that are too large at the top, and you hit 100% after you run through about half of your factors, and then you have to go back and mark them down. So in this case, let's just say that growth in the economy would be about 25%, or a quarter of achieving that 10% increase in sales will be due to the economy. Our consultative sales and product features training could contribute a fifth, or 20%. Then we've got this new salesperson incentive at 15. Items number 4 and 5 here are tied at 10%. And then we've got 4 bottom items. No use in trying to separate items that are all close to each other. We'll just let them all be tied at about 5%. And in doing an exercise like this, it's probably also not worth it to go much below increments of 5%. These, after all, are just our forecasts, our best guesses about next year. We're just trying to be close. So increments of 5% are fine. We won't get too fancy. We're not going to spend too much time on this. But it's clearly letting us know in the sponsor's mind the economy is the single most important factor. We've got 4 factors down here that play a small role. And we've got some other ones in here that are also certainly worth noting and more important than these. So this is about twice as important as 4 and 5, and 4 and 5 are about twice as important as these. So we've got them in the right order, reflecting relative importance. They do have to add up to 100%. It is interesting to note in this case how many of these are HR initiatives. So 2, 3, and 5 are all HR initiatives. This comes from total rewards or compensation and benefits. This had come from talent acquisition, all aspects of HR. And in this case, it turns out that HR will help contribute almost half to accomplishing this goal. HR looked at holistically this way, when you think about what you and your colleagues and the rest of HR can do to help your company accomplish its goals, sometimes can be quite surprising, far more impactful than any other department I can think of in an organization. That's why it's so exciting to be in the field we're in. We have the potential to make significant and visible contribution to our company's success. This is just an example of what that might look like. Now, as I said, some aren't quite comfortable going there, putting percentage contributions next to that. Most implementing TDRp are starting with the qualitative approach. A little bit easier, a little bit less threatening to people, where our goal here is to come up with a high, medium, low, or essential. Essential, though, just as a note, should be used sparingly. Quite honestly, a lot of our HR initiatives are not essential. They're very worth doing, but the organization could exist without our doing them. It's not going to go bankrupt. It's not going to fail. Nothing terrible is going to happen. There are things we do which are essential, where terrible things would happen if we did not do it, but not everything falls into that category. There's compliance that we have to do. In a high turnover organization, you have to bring new people in, or you could go out of business. There are certainly more tactical items that HR does, like payroll, that have to be done. But that doesn't account for everything we do. A lot that we do in training, performance capability, capability management, leadership development is very helpful and very good, but not essential. So we don't want to overuse essential. Reserve it for those things that truly are essential. Now, for the rest, for the high, medium, and low, you actually begin with the same process we just went through, meeting with the sponsor, asking them to talk about what it's going to take to achieve their goal. So list those factors and prioritize them. And that's something fairly straightforward and simple. All sponsors can do that. Many have thought about it that way before. Maybe some have not thought to prioritize it. They really should have. But even if they hadn't, it won't be hard to prioritize it. And then we're just trying to get to the relative importance of each. We're not going to assign a percentage contribution now. We're just trying to get to the relative importance of each. And remember, our goal is to be roughly right. So if there is one factor that is dominant, like much more important than all the others, if we were doing percentage contributions, it would be one with a 50% or greater contribution. When you're listening to a sponsor, you by the language they use, you can identify it. They would say something like, oh, the dominant factor is, oh, there is one that's more important than all of the rest, or one that's more important than all the others combined. If you hear language like that, you know that one they're talking about has high impact. And at most, there is one labeled high impact. You cannot have more than two or more than one. So you can have only one that's high impact. You might not have any, but at most you can have one. Now, there may be another factor that's very important. And again, if we had percentage contributions, it might be in the 30-40% contribution range. Then you could label that medium. If there was no factor that was high, you could have a couple that are medium. So you could imagine having two, maybe even three in a longer list that would be medium if you didn't have any high. So if no factor is predominant, then the highest one's going to be a medium impact, and you might have a couple. After you've done high and medium, what's left is low. So low impact means, yes, there should be some impact from it, but not very much. So may still be very worthwhile to do it, but the sponsor can't think by just doing one that has low impact, you're going to achieve your goal. You might have many low impacts combined together. So here's just an example at the bottom of the page on patterns that you might have. You could have a high, medium, and several lows. You could have a couple mediums and some lows. You could not have a high and have some mediums and lows. You could have all lows. More typically, you'd have a high and perhaps a medium and some lows, or a couple mediums and some lows. Again, this is somewhat subjective. That's okay. That's what a business plan is. And the process in all of this is just as important as the percentage contributions that come out of it or the adjectives that you agree upon. You're having a business discussion with the sponsor as a partner here to better understand how that sponsor is going to accomplish his or her goal for your organization and what role you might play in it. And relatively speaking, how important is your initiative compared to the other initiatives? So you have agreement up front with the sponsor, so you both are on the same page for what to expect, for what you are accountable for. You don't want to get to the end of the year. The sponsor has not accomplished their goal. The board of directors and the public is disappointed with your company's performance, and the sponsor turns to you and says, I was very disappointed in HR this year. I was counting on you to be the dominant driver, and you let me down. Now, if you haven't had this discussion before, you might have been thinking all along you would have a low impact, and you assumed the sponsor would also be thinking you were going to have a low impact. But since you had never talked about it with the sponsor was thinking you would have a high impact and was relying on you to deliver most of his or her goal, and you had a disconnect. And now someone's disappointed at the end of the year, and it didn't have to be. You should have had this discussion before the year started, before you deployed the initiative, so you both were on the same page and agreed whether indeed you were going to have a high impact or a low impact or a medium impact, and get agreement on those roles and responsibilities, especially if it's a high or medium impact, on what the sponsor will have to do to help have that impact on their own goal. So the process is just as important as whatever number or adjective comes out of it. Now, generally, you can use at least the qualitative approach, but if you cannot for any reason, then plan C is to default to a proxy. And a proxy, we use proxies all the time. They're not perfect. We'd rather have a direct measure, but they're better than nothing. Sometimes people use education as a proxy for intelligence. Certainly not a perfect measure of that. But if you had nothing else, better than nothing, yes, probably. Proxies generally are things you're already collecting. People are already comfortable with the measure. So use a proxy when you cannot get agreement on the isolated expected impact, either quantitatively or qualitatively. A great example in the learning field is the application rate. So you'd always like to go as high as you can when you choose a proxy. We'd love to have impact for learning and development. If we can't have impact, then we get application, because we know if people aren't applying what they learned, it will have no impact. So if we can't get impact, let's get the next best thing, which is the application rate, something we and the sponsor can agree on, something the sponsor directly controls. Is the application by their own employees. You do not control that. The sponsor is the one who controls that. So good to get their agreement up front and their roles and responsibilities for how they're going to help drive application in their own organization. You can imagine others for other areas, other disciplines for HR. So you can always fall back to some proxy. The point is to agree on some measure of success before the year begins, before the initiative is deployed. And that's what's going to be captured in our outcome statement and our summary report. This just compares the pros and cons of each method. We'd like to have quantitative if we can. Most start out with qualitative because it's easier to reach agreement. It seems less threatening because there aren't as many numbers involved, but it is more subjective. There's trade-offs here. The quantitative is least subjective. Qualitative is a little more subjective. And then proxy might be easiest to do, but also the least impactful. Doesn't demonstrate as tight a link between the desired outcome and our HR initiative. Now, what if you have a situation where the sponsor either is not engaged, there isn't a sponsor, there's a committee who cannot agree, for whatever reason they just will not do their role, they will not help. All right, we don't give up, we never give up. We'll do it ourselves, but being humble and transparent, we'll then run it by other leaders and give them a chance to input. So follow the same steps in your thinking. So think about the factors, put them in priority order, see where your initiative comes out there, assign the percentage or assign the adjective, and then run it back by the sponsor or the committee. They may not have felt comfortable having that discussion with you initially, but once they see what you've come up with, they may say, oh yes, that looks fine, now I see what you were asking, okay. Or they say, oh no, that's not reasonable, I can't agree to that. Well, now you've got them engaged, so now you say, okay, well then what do you think it should be? So you couldn't even get them the discussion before. Now if they've seen you're about to use something and share it with the CEO, now they're engaged. Okay, you could have had this discussion a month ago, but okay, now you've got their attention, and now you can get their input. And if they still won't even look at that, then you're going to pass it on to other leaders. Perhaps you have a governing board, perhaps you have a CEO, and simply say, this is what we've come up with, these were our assumptions, and we'd love your feedback. And if you think any of these need to be modified, we'll be happy to do it. Just let us know. So again, being very transparent, very humble, very conservative, the approach works just fine. So hopefully that gives you some ideas about how we actually engage sponsors and talk with them. It's not as hard as it may have first sounded. Very interesting discussions, great to be in the room. They know so much about their areas. It's really fun to listen to them talk, and you can facilitate the discussion and get to at least the qualitative, if not the quantitative isolated expected impact, or failing that, agree on some measure to use. And quite frankly, if after all of this you and the sponsor can't even agree on a proxy measure, if you can't agree on any measure of success for this initiative, then why are you doing it? How can it be worth spending your organization's money on an initiative that no one can agree will have impact or how much it will be? I caution you not to proceed in that case. All right, the last topic for today, communicating results through the year. We've done the hardest work now in having the initial discussions with the sponsors. You should be checking in regularly with the sponsors and stakeholders. A lot of our initiatives run throughout the year or for many months, and if that's the case, you want to check in every month, every other month. See if they're still comfortable. You spent time, it's upfront, getting agreement on the expected impact. Are they comfortable with it? You might be able to bring some data to that, some year-to-date results. They will have at least anecdotal evidence about whether it's working or not. So you're asking them if they're comfortable. Because remember, in our statements we're showing year-to-date results, and in our reports we're showing a forecast. So where did the year-to-date results come from? Well, if the program isn't complete, if it's still underway, then you're checking back with them and seeing if they're still comfortable. You can remind them that we agreed 6 months ago we'd have a medium impact, or we agreed we'd have a percentage contribution of 20% towards your goal. Are you still comfortable with that? They'd say, well, yes, I don't know if anything's changed. I'm hearing good things. So it would continue to be used unless they're not comfortable. You'd ask them how we think the year is going to end. You'd ask them for their forecast for sales for how the year is going to end to show in the forecast column. And as long as they're still comfortable with the expected contribution from your program, you would continue to show that. If they're not, then you can adjust it up or down. If you and the sponsor now believe, for whatever reason, your initiative is going to have a smaller impact than planned, then you can scale it down. Maybe you agreed for a business plan it was going to have a 20% impact, but now halfway through the year you realize for whatever reason that's unlikely, and maybe you should mark it down to a 10% contribution, which you would reflect in the forecast for the year, and you'd reflect in some of the year-to-date results as well. So if sales are up 4% and you've lowered your estimate for impact to 10%, then the year-to-date contribution from learning would just be the 4% times the now reduced 10% is a 0.4 of an increase due to training. So it's just math, you're just applying the numbers or you're putting the adjective in. If you have any actual results available, if you've completed your initiative and done a follow-up study, now you might have actual results to put under year-to-date and to put in the forecast column. So if you've wrapped it up, if it's completed, then you could put something in. So again, right now we're just talking about what to put in under year-to-date and forecast. The starting point was whatever we had for the plan. In this case, going back to an expected 25% contribution. And as long as we continue to expect a 25% contribution to the goal, then you would take the 25% times the 17% and get the 4% here. Likewise, as long as people are still comfortable with the 25% impact for the whole year, if the sponsor says the forecast is 20% for the year, same as plan, then 25% times the 20% is a 5% forecast for the year as well. If they're no longer comfortable with the 25% contribution, then use whatever the new number is to multiply by the 17% and multiply by the 20%. Methodology is just the same. Here's an example down here where the sponsor now believes that by the end of the year expenses will be reduced by 18% instead of 15%. But if they're still comfortable with the 30%, then you could use that to multiply by the 18%. So same sort of things going on. In program reports, remember in program reports there are many different formats for this, but typically there was a page in a program report that had the goals for the year, so set with the sponsor at the start of the year, and then the bottom half of the page had the year-to-date results. So year-to-date results in terms of your efficiency measures, like how many participants you put through, did you hit completion dates. Year-to-date results in terms of your effectiveness measures. So how are you doing with regard to those? And then the forecast over here. So this is just reflecting now that you believe you're going to put more people through the course than you thought. So you're using the forecast column, and this just compares it directly to plan. You might be having discussions with the sponsor on this program in support of their goal, and you've agreed that you're going to be able to put more people through. They might have been so impressed with the program that they came back to you and said, can we put some more people through, more than we'd originally planned? And you say yes or no. If it's yes, you can reflect the results here. So you've done, again, the hard work at the beginning of the year, reflected here in the top half of the program report, but reflected in your plan column of your other reports. All that comes from working with a sponsor. And then in the plan, in the year-to-date and forecast columns, you're reflecting your latest thinking as you keep engaged with the sponsor throughout the year. You're reflecting your latest thinking. So it provides what you need to manage your function internally in your monthly meetings, and it provides a basis for discussion with the sponsor throughout the year and a place to capture any changes that you and the sponsor agree to throughout the year as you communicate. So that is the topics we want to cover for today. We'll open it up for questions in just a second here to see if you have any. For anyone who's not a member, we do encourage you to look at membership. We'd love to have you as a member. I think it gives great value in terms of what you get for the $2.99. So please do consider that. You can get the formulas and references for all the measures, Excel versions of sample statements and reports. So please do consider that. And we have a workshop coming up in Denver in just a month. For those of you that want to accelerate your mastery and implementation, there's no better way than to attend a 2.5-day workshop. So we've got one coming up in a month in Denver, and on your calendars, put down October as our last workshop of the year in Chicago, followed by the conference. So in a 1.5-day conference in Chicago, something for you to consider. You can learn a lot about TDRp. We're going to have case studies there of people who have been doing this for more than a year now, so you can learn from that. The webinars you know about, we just did this webinar, but you can let people know that we do these every other month, the Intro to TDRp, and this particular webinar, we just rotate those. If you have others who couldn't make it today, let them know. Just check the website, and they can find when the next one's offered. For members, we have implementation only, members only implementation guidance. Next one will be in a week, April 22nd. We have those every month. They're for members only. In those, we focus on particular questions you have. They're usually a smaller group, as well as some more guidance from us. We do have certification and accreditation underway now. We've had our first 3 people achieve TDRP certification. So we are certifying individuals, we certify software, we certify, and we also accredit organizations and consultancies. Also new this year will be communities of practice rolling out in the next month, one for the public, one for members only, and a greater focus on business acumen. So we're bringing up a business acumen page where you can find resources to improve your business acumen. So that's coming up as well. If you haven't taken a close look at the website, you can find all this information out at the website. So all of this is open to the public. You can find out what the measures are, although the definitions and formulas are reserved for members only. You can see what the statements and reports look like and sign up to be on our email list. So with that, let's see if we have any questions. If you have a question, put your hand up, and if you're muted, I will unmute you and let you ask the question. Or you could type in a question if you have one. So anyone have any questions? Now I'll bet some of you do, especially on figuring the impact out. So what didn't we answer to your satisfaction in terms of having discussions with sponsors?
Dave, we did have a question earlier about what roles and responsibilities stakeholders have. If we had like a template or something to present.
We don't, but since I've talked about that a few times, we should make one up. So as I mentioned, we came to the realization we really needed one of those at Caterpillar. The primary roles of a sponsor are, to begin with, to really help you with the sponsorship and change management. After all, it is to accomplish their goal with their employees. So they have the greatest interest in this. They also need to make subject matter experts available if you need their help. But more than that, in the ideal world, I think as we all know, a sponsor will go out of their way to help set the initiative up for success. So they would communicate to their own people the importance of the goal, the importance of the initiative, how the initiative is going to help accomplish their goal, what they expect from their own people. So if it's a class you're sending them to, why are you asking them to go to this class? What do you expect them to do better or differently as a result of this training? And then once they're back from, let's say, a training class, then their direct supervisor needs to reinforce the importance of applying what they learned as soon as they get back and check up on that. The sponsor's the one that needs the list of who has attended the classes. They need to decide if it's mandatory, and if it's mandatory, they are the ones that have to make sure their own employees get there, not you. If it's not mandatory, but there's a target number to go through it, again, they have to manage that. You can give them the data, but they, in their monthly management meetings, need to see how many have gone to the class, how many are yet to go, and they need to manage to get those people there. But the most important single thing they do is the application, is the reinforcement on the job to make sure people apply what they learned if it's a training class. Those are responsibilities of the sponsor. You can be their consultant, their guide, but only they can execute that because their employees don't report to you. You have no authority over their employees. Only they do. And a lot of sponsors just haven't thought about it this way. A lot of sponsors out there still think that once they engage HR and you agree to help, that they're done with it. They've turned it over to HR, but it doesn't work that way. Unless their employees are transferring into HR, you don't have authority over them. So as long as their employees still work for them, they are the only ones who can drive the application, who can make sure that their organization gets the benefit of this HR initiative. But you have to help them as a performance consultant. You have to suggest things they can be doing if they're not used to this. Some sponsors are naturally good at this. Others don't have a clue. It's the ones that don't have a clue that really need your help. And it's also those sponsors who at the end of the year, with your help, will view you in an entirely new light. They will have come to appreciate the value you bring to them, how good of a business partner you are, because you got them to do things they otherwise wouldn't have done, and now they're seeing the results in their own organization. You've helped them be a better sponsor, a better officer in your organization. So it's a great position for you to be in, and it guarantees that you have greater impact on your company's results. So I think that's a great idea to write up a sample of that, and we'll put that on our to-do list. Great question.
We had another one in relation to that. Is it typically done at the curriculum owner level, sales onboarding, or leadership? Or do you take this to the COO?
Yeah, the things we're talking about here would be done with the sponsor. So if it's a sales initiative, then it's done with the head of sales. If it's a quality initiative, the head of quality. If it is a learning or an HR initiative to improve leadership or employee engagement, then typically the SVP of HR is the sponsor. And that's often the organization you're in anyway, so your boss or your boss's boss is the sponsor, and you would work with the SVP of HR. But what we're suggesting is that the best practice is to share this beyond just the sponsor. So if you have a governing board, to share your summary report, which captures your impact on the organization's goals, share that summary report with your governing board and with your CEO and with your CFO and other top leaders, so they all know what impact you're having on the organization. Good question.
We had another one as well of what methods do we recommend for capturing results if there are many programs and many employees?
Yeah, so now we're talking about the real world here, meets up with theory. So in theory, you might like to do what we've suggested for everything, but you can't because no one has the time, the budget, or the energy. So always use your own company's goals as a guide. Remember, as part of our process that we talk about in our first webinar in the series is to meet with your CEO, and that's where you find out what your company's top 5 or 6 or 7 goals are and their priority. That's what appears in your outcome statement in priority order and is transferred over to your summary report. So the summary report is showing the top goals in priority from your CEO. So when you have limited budget, limited staff, and want to implement TDRp or any reporting system, Start by focusing on those programs in support of your most important goals. So if sales is my #1 goal in the company, according to the CEO, I want to do what we've just talked about with the sponsor of sales, and I want to capture that, and I want to put that in the summary report, and I want a program report focusing on my programs in support of sales. Then I want to do it for the #2 goal, and the #3 goal, and the #4 goal. Now if I run out of money or time, I want to progress through that list in priority order until I run out of time or money. If I can get all 5 done, I will. I may be doing in a large company, like at Caterpillar and other large companies. We had hundreds of initiatives going on, but you can't do this for hundreds. So we did it for the most important initiatives in support of the highest priority goals. Start with those. Anything else?
Would you capture these results in a survey, or would you recommend another form?
Oh, I'd capture these goals, first of all, in the program report and in the summary report. So let's just quickly go back. Here's the program report. It focuses on programs, in this case, in support of reducing injuries by 20%. But this is where you would capture results. This is where we have the results of our efficiency measures, like how many people we put through. We have the results of the effectiveness measures. And depending on what other impact measures you were following, this example was capturing gross benefit and net benefit. The bottom line impact, though, was we were going to have a 60% contribution to reducing injuries. And so we're capturing that right here. And you've got year-to-date results, and you've got the current forecast. So I would capture program-level results right here in the program report. And at a higher level, let's see, at a higher level, I would capture them in a summary report. So again, the year-to-date column is where you capture year-to-date results, and the forecast column is where you capture the results that you expect or have achieved if the program's done for the year. So capture them first back in your summary report, your program report, and then we have an operations report to be used by the department head as well. So capture them first here. If you want to have additional reports with greater level of detail, fine, but these are the reports to be used in the active management of the function. Remember, the program head is using this summary report every month to kick off a meeting with the program or the department head's direct reports. Also passing this report up to the SVP of HR, to the CEO, to senior leaders. You don't want to give them too much detail to begin with. They can ask for more, but you want to give them just the high level to begin with. So this has a dual purpose in sending up the chain as well as starting off your meeting as a department head with your direct reports each month, and then the rest of the meeting every month for a department head and direct reports would be looking at the program reports for your key programs. Again, you can't do hundreds of these. So what are your top 4, 5, 6, maybe up to 10? We did about 10 at Caterpillar. 10 most important programs that the department head would want to review progress every month to make sure we were delivering against the company's most important goals, as well as the operations report, which we're not showing in today's webinar. Anything else?
In terms of automation, is there a way to collect this data automatically?
Yes and no. In a program report, when we look at the year-to-date page here, your LMS, your learning management system, if it's a learning one, will capture unique participants, total participants. It can capture completion dates. Many people use vendors or consultants to automate satisfaction collection, whether it's learning or any other HR process. If the survey size is likely to be large, than people are using. Vendors and consultants. Our founding organization, Knowledge Advisors, is an example of an organization that specializes in helping companies gather, collect, process data like this, effectiveness data like this. So yes, you can set up automatic feeds into reports for things that come out of your internal systems, that come from vendors and consultants. Some things, though, like some of the benefit calculations, are results of discussions with a sponsor, obviously cannot be automated. You can set up templates, so it's easy to plug in a number in the same place every month, but you can't automate it. And the point isn't to automate it. It shouldn't be on automatic pilot. You have a role to play in talking with people, which should never be automated. And so what you get out of those discussions with the sponsor needs to be put in manually, but you can make that job easier. So that's why I said yes and no. You can automate parts of this, and that makes sense. Other things, though, should never be automated. And it takes the management touch to look at this, interpret it, and put your forecasts in place. So the forecast will always be a manual process. That's how a manager earns their salary, by putting the plan in place, by managing throughout the year based on the year-to-date data, which can be automated, and then making the forecast and managing accordingly. Great questions. Andy, does that do it? Any other questions?
Yeah, I don't have any more questions via text. If anyone has any other questions, just raise your hand. We'll unmute you. Or you can go ahead and just type it in and I'll relay the message.
If not, we are coming up on almost 8 minutes past the hour, so appreciate having everyone join us today. Appreciate the great questions. And if you have not had a chance to attend that first webinar in the series, that will be coming up next month. We showed you that date a minute ago, just in case anyone's taking these out of order, which is fine. But just remember, we have the Intro to TDRp coming up May 7th if you haven't attended that one. If you're a member, check out our implementation guidance webinars. And we will be sending the PowerPoint out and making the recording available. It will also be on the website in the right-hand column of the home page in a few days. Thanks, everybody. Take care.